and we did many, in my view, formal considerations for polynomials and power series in with the two operators P and Q. But when we look at what we have done, the only thing that we have used is the fact that PQ minus QP is equal to well, this constant H over I times the identity. We didn't do anything else. We didn't use the fact that Q is multiplication by something, P is derivation by differentiation by something. We could give, well, we have given meanings to orbitals of certain exponentials. And the thing is, if instead of exponentials we are considering analytic functions, it will still be very, very hard to give a meaning, like a concrete meaning to the operators for corresponding to analytic functions, because what we would be considering is infinite series of the operators P and Q, which are unbounded, so there is no reason why you obtain something, I mean, from my point of view, which is really well defined. So the question is, how do you quantize smooth functions, like, and by quantize I mean really obtain operators, not formal stuff. And well, you have to use the Fourier transform. I mean, the idea is to use the Fourier transform, and so let's say that you have an observable A in the Q and P. You use the Fourier inversion formula, so you write it as an integral of A hat exponential Q S times P plus P times R. And so if I want to take the obval of A, well, this, you just take the obval through the integral. This is just a number, a constant, a scalar. So you just have this, the obval of this exponential, and the obval of the exponential, we're happy with them. They are good. We have defined them very, I mean, we have a very strong meaning, but we have given a good meaning to those things here. So if I want to go beyond formal power series, the idea is to use this formula here, the Fourier inversion formula, and saying that the obval of A is, so you write down the Fourier inversion formula and you take the obval of this exponential here. So, and the obval of this exponential here, we had computed it in previous slides. Then it was like this, it was this thing here. So it was the exponential, so it was the exponential of ISQ plus IRP. And we have decomposed it also in this way. And so you obtain this formula here. And now for the very, very, very first time, we use the fact that Q is the multiplication by X and P is essentially the differentiation with respect to X. And we have computed for those Q and P's, we have computed the exponential. So this is the multiplication by this modulation thing. And this is the exponential of P is basically the translation with respect to the variable. Well, it's a translation. It's a translation with respect to the variable. So if I take if I take this operator here, I let it act on the function phi, and I take it at the point x, but I have, well, I just write down what it means. Then I use the computation of the two exponentials, meaning translation and multiplication by the modulations. And I make a little change of variables so that phi becomes phi of t. And using the Fourier inversion formula and so you'd have so you develop A hat as an integral over A with some exponentials, and there are lots of exponentials, but a lot of them will disappear thanks to this property here, and what you obtain is this formula here. So let's so I was on R. Now I go back to Rn because it's exactly the same. So I go back to an n-dimensional setting to Rn. And what I have is this wonderful formula here. Well, I also make a little change of variable so that, but basically it is the same. I also make a little change of notation, some small change of variables. But what I obtain is this formula for the vowel quantization. And, but you know, well, again, the Cohen-Number quantization is not that bad. Well, you can do exactly the same as before. You can do exactly the same computation with the Cohen-Number quantization, and the only difference is that if you take the Cohen-Number quantization, you don't have this exponential h bar rs over 2, but you can do exactly the same computations, and what you obtain is a formula which is very much like this one here. The only difference is that instead of taking the midpoint between x and y, x is the variable on the left-hand side here, and y is the variable of integration here. So what you obtain is this quantity here, where x plus y here is replaced by x. And, well, as an analyst, I prefer that one because I can integrate with respect to y. And what I have, modulo some changes of variable, because 2 pi has, or some changes of variables involving the 2 pi constant, is here. I have this formula here, which I very much like, and I will explain why tomorrow. So we have this formula here, where here is pi has the Fourier transform of pi. And so as I will explain tomorrow, this, well, I really like that quantization. So I would like to say that it's not as if, so I always talk about the Cohen-Number quantization, and in one of my first slides, I explained that it came from the, well, let me get well, it came from an article of the mid-60s of Cohen and Nuremberg. But I mean, when you, but there are many other types of quantization that you can have. So the vowel quantization, well, Weil wrote his quantization in 26 or 28. The Cohen-Number quantization was written in 65 also, but I mean, later on people, I mean, Cohen and Nuremberg, just in their article in 65, they noticed that there was somehow a correspondence between the vowel quantization and what they were doing, but they didn't do anything with that. People after that started to think, okay, I mean, what is so special about taking the midpoint between x and y, or just taking x? And they came up with the definition of the tau quantization, where tau is just a constant between 0 and 1. And so for tau equals 1/2, you have the vowel quantization. For tau equals 1, you have the Cohen-Number quantization. For tau equals 0, you have what is called sometimes the anti-Cohen-Number quantization. And well, as a historical remark, let me say that while preparing this talk, I realized that there was even a different, a quantization before Paul Dirac's PhD thesis, and it was due to Born and Jordan, and it predates Paul Dirac's PhD thesis. And the Born-Jordan quantization is characterized on monomials by the following things. So if you quantize Q to the L and P to the L, what you do is that you consider all the expressions, P to a certain power, Q to the power N, P to another power. So what you have is, if you do if you quantize Qm P to the L, you have L plus 1 terms, and well, the first one is PL Q Qm. The second one is Pl minus 1 Q2P, and so on and so on. So this is to explain this point in dimension. So this, this is a very valid quantization as well, and it also it maps real valued polynomials to self-adjoint operators. So it is also a very good quantization, and it predates Paul Dirac's Paul Dirac's PhD thesis and the article by Weil on quantization. And a modern point of view is to say that basically the point-bound Jordan quantization is just considering those tau quantization and integrating all the taus between 0 and 1. And it turned out that in the last 5 years, lots of people have been using that in signal processing, so old ideas are going to get back. So what I would like to discuss now is I would like to, so up to now I've discussed many general considerations. I would like to talk about, I would like to give you one theorem and discuss the proof and explain what I will do tomorrow. So if you're doing quantum mechanics, or if you have studied quantum mechanics, for sure you have seen the Schrödinger equation. So it's just you are considering you're considering this equation here. So you're considering d by dt of wave functions equal basically this quantity here, which is the outline of the Hamiltonian. So Schrödinger equation applied to a function psi. So my function psi here is a function on Rn, and it depends on the time, and it also depends on the Planck constant. And so here you have an equation which is of the form first derivative in time, so you need an initial data at time equals 0. And the question is what happens when the Planck constant goes to 0. And the expectation, when you think about it, if the Planck constant goes to 0, well, you should recover classical mechanics. But how does it work? Why? Why? So to be my last comments of today, and this is where you start to see that you need to do analysis to understand that this expectation is in fact, in order to show that this is true, you have to work and you have to do a very fine analysis of the operators involved. So first, let me say that if you have this equation here, the solution is exactly exponential minus t I over h up. Okay, I think there is no minus, but basically, if you look at this equation here, the solution is exponential t. Oh yes, sorry, it's exponential t. So you put 1 over h here on the right hand side. So basically, you apply. Basically the solution you can write it formally like that, but what you obtain here is an exponential of a self-adjoint. So an exponential of a skew-adjoint operator. So this is, by Stone theorem, this preserves the L2 norm. So, sorry, I didn't say it very well. Schrödinger's equation is d by dt 1 over I h up h. So, at least formally, the solution is exponential t 1 over I h up h. And you give a meaning to that thanks to Stone's theorem, and it's a unitary operator. So the L2 norm of that function is the L2 norm of that function. So let's say that we have a state. So let's say that you're given data at time 0, is well, has L2 norm equal to 1. So let's say that we are considering the state at time 0. And well, at least so I'm going to present something which, well, from my view, the physical point of view, which tomorrow I will explain it with the point of view of an analyst. So if you consider the Schrödinger picture, what you should consider is a Wigner function associated to this family of those families of functions. So what it is well, it's given by this formula here. So why on earth would you consider that thing? And why did Wigner consider that thing around the 30s? Basically because it is equivalent to the Weyl quantization, meaning if I integrate any classical observable against this function here, this function on R2N, my observables are on R2N, what I obtain is exactly what has a meaning physically, meaning my op A at the state psi t. So, well, that's the definition of the Wigner transform of a family of functions psi 0 at. And the thing is, why would you do that, apart from having this relation here? It's because if you consider an observable which depends only on x, well, what you obtain, all computation done, using this, is just a of x against the square of psi of x dx. If I consider an observable which depends only on psi, well, when I consider this quantity here, all computation done, here it's a of psi, sorry, it's a of psi against this quantity here. So basically the Wigner transform is a way of putting together what has a meaning physically, meaning this density, the position, the density corresponding to position, and the density related to the momentum. So the Wigner transform, it's just this formula here, so that it satisfies this thing here. And it's just a way with a function on R to N, and it encodes the two densities, this one and this one. So densities for the position and the densities for the momentum. So what so there is the thing is that when you consider a Planck constant going to 0, when you consider the Planck constant when the Planck constant goes to 0, those Wigner functions here. So when you look at the Wigner function here, so psi t, we said that the psi t's were in L2. So if you consider this function here, it's an integrable function. So this function here is really well defined, and you're happy with that. But when h tends to 0, then the limit becomes singular. It's singular, but it remains something manageable. It has a limit, and it's given by a measure called the Wigner measure for this. So here's the statement. There exists a positive random measure, mu t, such that if I take if the Planck constant goes to 0, the quantity here, it's just the integration of A against t mu of t. So, for example, if you okay, a bit more physically, if your functions here, for example, if your functions, for example, oscillate a lot, which means that basically the momentum basically it becomes like so it oscillates a lot, so it becomes so at the limit this will become like a Dirac delta, but in a certain direction in the phase. Then your measure here will be this Dirac direction in the phase times dx. And another example is that if you take a sequence of functions here, which somehow have masses which concentrate at a point. The measure here that you will obtain will be just the Dirac mass at the point in which you concentrate the mass times Dxi for the phase. So the Wigner functions and their limits, they are somehow very important when you consider what it is somehow the first object that where you start to do phase space analysis in my views. Before it was always we were doing some formal considerations. Now we are starting to see that what we need to do is phase space analysis. We need to consider things which lives on Rn times Rn. We consider classical observable of x and psi, and we consider Wigner functions of x and psi, and we consider Wigner measures of x and psi. And so, Egorov theorems. So there are. So it's Egorov theorems tells you that if you look at the Wigner measure at time t. So if you look at the Wigner measure at time t, sorry, those are slides. So if you look at the Wigner measure for at time t fixed, so I call that ut. So if I look at ut, this will be like the Wigner measure at time 0, composed with the Hamiltonian flow. So it tells you that when h tends to 0, basically something happens and it is what you want. It is, you recover completely classical mechanics from taking the Planck constant going to 0, meaning the trajectories are then governed by the solution of Hamilton's equations. So a point is that here there is the famous Egorov theorem in the measure theory, but this is another Egorov theorem. This is another Egorov. This is U Egorov in 1969, and it is a paper in Russian. And let's say that it has been rediscovered, and well, this was again some formal considerations, and it has been really cleaned up from the point of view of analysis only in the 80s and the 90s. So also it was proved in 69. The real proof for, I mean, that an analyst would be happy with is much more recent. So let's discuss very quickly the main steps in the proof of Egorov's theorem. So you have, forgot a t here. So you look at the Wigner transform at time t, and you differentiate. So the Wigner transform was this quantity here, and you differentiate with respect to time. So time intervenes here and here. So if you differentiate with respect to time, it will give you this term here, where you differentiate to time this function here, plus the same expression, but this time the differentiation ends up on this t here. But now you know that psi th satisfies Schrödinger's equation. So you know that if you differentiate with respect to time psi th, what you obtain is modulo the constant with h, you obtain op h. So here you have op h, here you have op h, that and you put its adjoint on the left, but it's self-adjoint. So when you, well, all computation done, because there are some i's involved, a sign appears, and what you obtain is the commutator of oval of R, oval of A, the commutator of oval of A with oval of H. And but we just said that if you have a commutator, well, the oval, so the commutator of an oval, it's the oval of the Poisson bracket plus lower order terms. So here I have Poisson brackets of oval, so commutator bracket of oval. So this is oval of a Poisson bracket plus lower order terms, as we discussed. And so you compute this Poisson brackets. So H is equal to 1/2 of P squared plus V of Q. So and A is inobservable, so it gives you this thing. And so so I should remind you that the WHT is defined so that WHT integrated against A, it's veil of A psi H against psi H. So here I recognize, using this here, I recognize, well, I can interpret this with the Wigner functions. And so, massaging this thing, what I obtain is that the Wigner functions satisfy the following transport equation modulo another term in the Planck constant. So I have here a well-known Maxwell's equation. So it's a transport equation. So I can say that the Wigner function is equal to so the Wigner function at time t is equal to the Wigner function at time 0, but where if at time t I'm looking at the point x psi, well, it's as if, well, I have to basically use the Hamiltonian flow to go back in time for the, well, to consider, well, so I have this equality here, which is, well, a very easy property to prove with the transport equation. But of course, all that is modulo on the rotor. And well, when I take the limit when h tends to 0, so the limit of my Wigner function is the Wigner measure, and so what I obtain is exactly the what I have written here, but somehow the Wigner measure at time t is equal to the Wigner measure at time 0, composed with Hamiltonian flow. And well, so that's all what I'm going to say today. And so tomorrow I will discuss I will discuss why my domain of research, which is harmonic analysis, has many links with pseudo-differential operators. Pseudo-differential operators, for me, it's those things. Yeah. And it has also very strong links with Lie groups. That's it.